Anthony, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you now.
Should we go ahead and start all over again?
Oh yeah, completely. Nobody was seeing that at all. Yeah, you guys kind of jumped the gun, but it's okay. We'll get back to it. So
Sorry
here we
about
go.
that. Thank you.
It's totally fine. It's a new process. So here we go. Everybody standing by. We will go live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
And 1, 2, 3. Good morning. Before we get started, can someone please send us an okay in the chat box to ensure that you can hear us? Okay, looks like we're good. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Corey Lowe, and I'm the commander of the Oversight and Compliance Division for the Albuquerque Police Department. I'd like to cover a few quick instructions before we begin. We cannot hear or see any of the attendees, aka you, but you can hear and see the panelists. But just in case, we do ask that your computer remain on mute during this time. There will be 2 available chat functions. There'll be the regular chat box that you normally see in Zoom, and then the Q&A chat box. If you are having a hard time hearing any of the presenters or staff, please send us a chat in the regular chat box. This town hall is scheduled for 1 hour, and we will work hard to keep that time. After each presentation, which there are 2, we will provide time for questions. We ask that you please utilize the Q&A chat box for any questions, and we will answer them in the order in which they are received. For any comments, please utilize the regular chat box. Again, due to time constraints, if we are unable to get through all of your questions, please email us at apdcompliance@cabq.gov, and we will respond within 24 to 48 hours. Just in case you missed that email address, we will provide it in the email in the chat. Thank you again for your continued interest in the ongoing reform efforts, and I will now lead to Interim Chief Harold Medina for the opening remarks. Chief?
Good morning, Albuquerque. This is Interim Chief Harold Medina of the Albuquerque Police Department, and today we're going to be going over and giving presentations on 2 topics that we think are going to assist the Albuquerque Police Department in going forward and achieving a greater level of compliance, transparency, and ensuring that force that is used by our officers is within policy. There's a national dialogue right now going on about police and the use of force, and it's a much needed dialogue. And even in the state of New Mexico, there's a lot of reform efforts for policing that are being presented in the past 9 months, and in the near future, there's more changes that are anticipated. In a way, the Albuquerque Police Department was ahead of this process because of our court settlement agreement, and we started making changes in a lot of the areas that we do work. One of the areas that we struggled with is force still, and we're going to give an update on some of the processes we have for the use of force report and how that will be utilized to help us gain greater compliance with our settlement agreement. And we're also going to talk about scorecards and how scorecards are going to assist us to get to the next level of compliance. The use of force report is very important, not only for the settlement agreement, but it's extremely important for the community. This is our way of being transparent with the community and letting the community know what is occurring in terms of force being used by the Albuquerque Police Department. But it's also important for us as a department to better our department policies and our training to ensure that we're doing everything possible to reduce the use of force by our officers when possible. I think that one of the things we always have to keep in mind is the fact that this data can now be used by our academy to develop trends, and these trends can then be trained, and we could have solutions to some of the problems that we're facing. And that's what this whole process is about with the Department of Justice and the monitoring team, is finding ways and systems where we self-monitor ourselves and we correct problems ourselves in a proactive manner. This is a philosophy that we're trying to bring to the Albuquerque Police Department across the board, and that's how the scorecards are going to be tied into this. We know that we have in the past successfully reduced crime rates through accountability and scorecards. We've also used that same scorecard to help us in other parts of the settlement agreement when it comes to body camera usage and compliance by officers, monthly inspections by sergeants. When the scorecards were first developed, It looked like somebody literally had written all over the scorecard with the red magic marker, because red signified that we weren't in compliance. Yellow meant we were getting closer. And over the weeks, we started to move in that direction of yellow. And now the vast majority of these monthly scorecards for the field are completely green, showing that we are in compliance. And we're giving that immediate feedback to area commanders. We're expanding this process of scorecards to other areas of the department. We hope to have our special operations division under these scorecards at the beginning of the year. And as we continue to move forward, we're also looking at the advice given to us by the Department of Justice and the monitoring team and applying these same scorecards to other areas where we're struggling. There'll be a process and a scorecard in discipline that's handed out. And one of the struggles we've had is a consistency. So when a discipline goes outside or is reduced, it'll automatically trigger a score being put into the scorecard, which can then be reviewed by the command staff of the individuals who changed it, all the way on up through the chief. And the system is set up so that if the chief changes it, well, obviously that's going to get flagged and go over to the Department of Justice also, and they'll be well aware of what my actions are. So these scorecards are the way for us to finally get the police department going forward in a means that we could critique ourselves, self-correct ourselves, and ensure that things don't escalate to the point where they're a problem. Like I stated earlier, these scorecards and this process of self-auditing ourselves is going to be applied to other areas of the department, such as monitoring of overtime, traffic accidents. There's a lot of areas that we want to apply this concept so that we're always continuously looking at how we could improve our services to the community and our accountability for the actions of all the individuals involved in the Albuquerque Police Department. So thank you, and we will move on to the next portion of this presentation, and we'll stand for questions at the end.
Commander Frick, if you'd like to go into it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Acting Commander Sean Frick. I'm currently the Acting Commander for the Internal Affairs Force Division. Soon you'll be seeing a presentation for our annual use of force report. Before we go into that, though, I want to briefly explain our force policies and a little bit of background on it, so you all know what's going on within that presentation. APD policy defines force as when officers take an action to defend themselves or others or overcome active resistance. The Supreme Court has established through case law guidelines for determining if your force is lawful, but APD policy goes above what is established in that case law. And our policy exists to hold officers accountable for the highest levels of lawful, professional, and ethical standards. Through case law, the courts have determined that officer force nationally should be evaluated based on an objective reasonable standard. So objective reasonableness means that if an officer acted at the same level that an objectively reasonable officer would do, then the force is within the law. APD policy contains that same standard, but actually goes above it by adding on 3 more core components for a total of 4. So APD's policy related to force has the 4 main components of being reasonable, necessary, minimum, and proportional. We also have provisions that require officers to reduce force when resistance also decreases. We also have an entire SOP section requiring officers to use de-escalation techniques with the goal of calming tense situations and hopefully reducing the need for force. Prior to January 11th, policy classified force just in 2 levels, either as force or as a serious use of force. We're beginning on January 11th of 2020, we moved to a 3-tier system for classifying force. At the lowest level, we have our level 1 uses of force, which includes shows of force where an officer points a weapon at an individual, resisted handcuffing, and any force resulting only in temporary pain. The next highest level will be our level 2 force, which includes intermediate force, which involves empty-hand takedowns, use of an intermediate weapon system, or if the individual sustains an injury that doesn't require hospitalization. And our highest level is now classified as a level 3, which is force that does or is likely to cause serious injury or death. For example, force used against handcuffed individuals, critical firearms discharges, or 3 or more applications of what we refer to as an ECW, or is commonly known as a taser. Those level 3 uses of force used to be classified as a serious use of force under previous policy. In terms of investigation, all level 1's use of force are investigated by the involved officer's chain of command, and any level 2 or 3 use of force is investigated by my division, the Internal Affairs Force Division. So that's our force policy in a nutshell. I will now send it to our data analyst, Kate Jacobs. She compiled the annual use of force report, which encompasses essentially officer use of force for the last 4 years and trends that we're seeing through that.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Commander Frick. My name is Kate Jacobs. I'm a data analyst too for the Internal Affairs Force Division at APD. And I'm happy to share with you 4 years of data. So this covers 2016 through 2019. And our goal here was really to look at force in the big picture of what's happening in Albuquerque. So we tried to take a more holistic view of force. When we're talking about force data, there's a couple ways that we can measure it. And I want to be really clear that one case might involve multiple officers, multiple individuals upon whom force is used or shown, and multiple applications. So you will notice not all of the numbers add up to the same total, and that's because one case can have multiple layers within. We talk a lot about shows of force and uses of force, and you'll see the abbreviations SOF for show of force and use of force, or UOF, throughout this presentation. So we have the total number of cases, this is at the case level, for 4 years in Albuquerque, and you'll see uses of force, shows of force. We do see a 19% increase from 17 to 18, and a 23% increase in use of force cases from 18 to 19. And again, these are at the case level. As far as why our cases are increasing, we did launch an enhanced use of force training. And as Commander Frick mentioned, we do have new policies that we finalized. And both of those things, if you look at the timeline, seem to precede an increase in what we call empty hand techniques. So these are some of the things we're looking at as far as why we seem to see an increase in use of force cases. Albuquerque Police covers 6 area commands, and we have force incidents outside of our area commands as well. So you'll see each area command broken down by year for those 4 years for use of force and show of force cases. Again, this is at the case level. And something we noticed is that the Southeast tends to have more force cases than our other area commands. However, if you look at those force cases against activity, which we're measuring here as calls for service, Southeast is proportionate. They're right about what we would expect. And across all 6 area commands, Foothills, Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, Southwest Valley, we have 2 or fewer use of force calls or use of force cases for every 1,000 calls for service. So something I really want to emphasize, while it seems like these numbers might be a lot, if you look at use of force in the context of calls for service, the arrests, force is actually quite rare. For all 4 years, we see dispatched calls for service. So we're not counting things like if an APD officer calls for fire rescue or if they call for a tow truck. We're talking about APD responding to calls from the public. We're also measuring what we call OIAs, or officer initiated actions. That's exactly what it sounds like if an officer is on patrol and he initiates an action if he sees something suspicious. We have custodial arrests and then force incidents. And in this context, force is actually so rare that it's quite difficult to see on this graph. So when we look at the amount of interaction that APD officers have with the public, force is extremely rare. We're talking about maybe 1 to 500 to 1,000 calls for service and officer initiated actions, and 4 to 5% of arrests are associated with force. I did want to show you our map of force events over the 4 years. I had mentioned to you earlier that Southeast tends to have the most force events. And you'll see here, you can actually start to see Central light up on the map. Again, Southeast has a lot of population. They have most of the police activity. So this is right in line with what we would see, a correlation there. One of the highlights I wanted to share from the report, we talk about OBRD. That's the on-body recording device. You might also be familiar with the term body cameras. So how often are the officer who's involved in using or showing force, how often are they capturing that full encounter on their OBRD? And two things that I really want to highlight here, if you look at where we were in 2016 and you see that gray 489 section, that's null, meaning we were missing that data. We weren't even recording if we were recording. So we weren't completing this data, we weren't collecting it. And now you look at us in 2019. So number one, we're doing a much better job measuring this indicator. And number two, we're doing a much better job capturing these events on body cam in full. And I think that ties into what you'll hear on the scorecards as well. So we're happy to see that. It's something we've worked on department-wide. We did want to look at both race and ethnicity when it comes to individuals upon whom force is used or shown. And we do measure race and ethnicity as two separate fields. So race includes white, Native American, Black, mixed race, Asian, Pacific Islander, and ethnicity is an indicator Hispanic or non-Hispanic. So I want to be really clear that these are two separate and independent fields. We have a breakdown for shows of force and uses of force across all 4 years by race. And that's interesting to look at. What I wanted to do next is compare that to the demographics of Albuquerque. So we have census data on the far left as a percent, meaning 73% of individuals in Albuquerque are white, 5% are Native American, 3% are Black, etc. And then I did the same thing for both shows and uses of force, the individuals involved across all 4 years. So for instance, 73% of individuals in Albuquerque are white, and they comprise 68% of people involved in a show of force in 2016. So we really wanted to look at the proportions and see if anything jumped out. At first glance, it does look like it could be disproportionate. So for instance, 5% of Albuquerqueans are Native American, and they comprise 15% of the uses of force in 2016. So that seems like they're overrepresented. I did some statistical testing, and what we found was inconclusive. The best way I can explain this is if I have a penny, I would expect to flip it and have it come up heads 50% of the time and tails 50% of the time. That would be proportionate. If I flip the penny 100 times and it comes up heads 90 times, that doesn't seem right. It seems like something's going on. But if I flip the penny twice and it comes up heads twice, that's inconclusive. I don't have enough data. And so because some of these overall numbers are quite small. So for instance, we're talking about 16 individuals, 39 individuals in a given year. It's inconclusive. But I did want to let everyone know this is the type of question that we're asking ourselves. And these are the conversations that we are having internally at APD. So even though it was inconclusive, it's definitely something we pay attention to and we plan to continue examining. We had the same conversation around ethnicity. So as I explained, race and ethnicity are two separate fields. And I have the same breakdown here. Again, it was inconclusive, but we are looking at this data in this light. Something interesting from the report that I wanted to share with you, we measured how many individuals involved in a use of force are unarmed. So I'm excluding show of force cases here. But if an individual is involved in a use of force, about 3/4 of them do not have a weapon. I wanted to compare that to the officer's applications. So the graph on the left is, we talked about those multiple levels at which we can measure a force case. This is individuals on the left, and on the right is applications. So just keep that in mind. These are two different levels. But if you look at the applications involved in a use of force, over 81% of those do not involve a weapon. So that would be something like the taser or a firearm, anything like that. The majority of our force applications are actually unarmed. That would be something like the empty hand technique. And I think that really speaks to our officers' ability to use force proportionally in rapidly changing, unpredictable situations. I can assure you the report is comprehensive. It is over 70 pages. So these were some of the highlights that I wanted to share with you today. You can see the full report on our website, and I'm definitely happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kate. There's a few questions on here. So we're going to have a few that are related to use of force and a couple that are related to chief. So I'm going to read them first, and then I will refer to the panelists who will be answering. So it looks like our first one was, Chief, what part do you see the CPOA board's function playing in the accountability of APD to the community and taxpayers, especially in use of force? Chief?
You know, that's a great question. And as I research and I speak to my counterparts across the nation, I think we're very fortunate that we've already created a system of civilian oversight in Albuquerque. A lot of major cities are only now undertaking this feat and recognizing the importance of having external overview over some of the cases within the department. And our primary goal right now is to ensure that we continue to work with the CPA, listen to some of their concerns. And just this past week, we've really worked hard to start figuring out how we're going to get more information over to them so that they could conduct the investigations that are needed. I see that the CPOA is the civilian oversight portion of the department as it's titled, and this is very important for transparency and accountability. And I fully support that we continue to strive to improve our relationship and ensure that we're providing the necessary information to the CPOA so that they could conduct their investigations.
Thank you, Chief. Looks like we have another one for you, sir. It is, the new safety department is supposed to relieve APD of nonviolent calls for service. Communities are asking for a significant increase in patrols and decrease in response time. Will the new safety department provide the needed balance between law enforcement and cost of compliance? Chief?
You know, I think that this is an essential part of not just the settlement agreement, but providing proper service to the community. The new public safety department is truly going to help us get the citizens, our customers, connected with the right resources that are proper. It's unfortunate that through a lot of historical funding cuts that we've lost a lot of the resources, whether they be for the mental health services or for substance abuse. And I think this new department is going to help put the right individuals in contact with the resources needed to get over their issues or get them in contact with the right resources. Too many times we are dispatching officers to calls that we should not be responding to, that aren't going to get resolved the way that they need to be resolved. And the prime example I use of this is, I don't know how many times during my career I was dispatched to a home where parents couldn't control a 7 or a 9-year-old. At one point in time, I was 22 years old with no kids of my own, being dispatched to a home to help parents with their kids. I didn't even have any kids. I probably didn't give the best advice. It was probably bad advice, and it wasn't my place to be doing that type of a function. So I think this public safety department is going to be key in a lot of ways for us reducing our uses of force against populations that we shouldn't be contacting in the first place because there isn't a law enforcement need for it. So I fully support this public safety department. I think it's the wave of the future. I know a lot of cities are looking to see how they are going to implement this, and I fully support it. And I hope that we could have a good community conversation to ensure that this group of individuals receives the proper funding so that it could move forward successfully and help us continue to make Albuquerque. And I think the key here is not a safe city. We need to make Albuquerque a healthy city. And a healthy city ensures that it gets its residents all the help that they need for long-term solutions.
Thank you, Chief. The next two are going to be for Acting Commander Frick, and then we're going to go back to a couple more that are probably for Chief. So regardless of a person being taken into custody, upon approach of a situation, what is going through an officer's mind regarding assessment of the situation? Sometimes it appears the officer's manner and demeanor increases anxiety as opposed to showing control, situation management. This can be conceived as obvious, implicit, and bias. Acting Commander Frick.
Yeah, thank you, Commander Lowe. It's an excellent question. Related to implicit bias, so we have policies specifically against bias-based policing. I know implicit bias is a very human behavior and it's very difficult to overcome and control. However, if there's any indication of any bias through our investigations, we certainly will hold officers accountable for that. Related to the extremely tense situations that officers are often encountering, their first and foremost goal is safety for themselves and the public and gaining control of that situation. And yes, sometimes those tense situations do lead to an officer becoming more anxious and can potentially escalate the situation. And that's why we have our policy requiring de-escalation, where we can either, if the officer isn't doing that properly, they can be sent for further training or even hold them accountable through discipline if necessary. The department's also taking a lot of proactive steps to give officers the tools necessary to properly de-escalate. They receive extensive training in the Basic Academy for crisis intervention. And then after completion of the academy, all of our officers who have gone through a 40-hour crisis intervention certification training. And then a significant number of officers have additional training on top of that through our enhanced crisis intervention training program. We also have mobile crisis teams where there's a certified clinician riding with an officer and they can respond to many of our higher priority and more volatile calls. And our policy also requires supervisors to respond to some of those same high priority calls with the specific purpose to do exactly that: gain control of the situation, slow the momentum, and reduce the need for force.
And the next question is also for you. Can you speak to when an OBRD is muted or turned off as opposed to when there is a failure to activate?
Yes, absolutely. So whenever we're investigating a force case and we don't have video as required, a misconduct investigation is open and we conduct a thorough investigation. That we do sometimes see just simple equipment malfunctions, and sometimes video is turned off because of that. We're able to prove that. However, if an officer is just simply failing to turn on his camera, they will be held accountable to be disciplined. As far as the mute function, that was actually a function that's been turned off for a while now to prevent officers from muting their cameras. There's also recently been a change in state law requiring us to record all law enforcement contacts in their entirety. So officers are actually recording more than we were before. So I think as time goes on, we'll start to see the concerns of missing OBRD start to diminish.
Thank you, Acting Commander Frick. Going to the next one, this is for APD leadership. Do you think that change of APD leadership will have an effect on use of force? If so, how?
I think absolutely it's going to have an effect on the use of force. If you look at IMR 12, one of the criticisms that we faced is that discipline wasn't being imposed on officers who were involved in misconduct. And discipline isn't the answer for every single situation, but there are some situations where discipline or termination are the absolute necessary to ensure that we set a standard. I believe that also our ability to look through our data and make sure that we're taking that and have a vision of how we're going to turn this data into updates and training, how we're looking at policies in the future on developing within the department, how we go out and perform our duties within the community is going to have a function. And this all ties into a lot of our strategies. For example, our ceasefire VIP program. That program is designed to specifically go and to remove the drivers of crime from a community, leaving a small footstep as possible within that community. Where in the past, and we saw this when other agencies have assisted us in the city, there's this flooding of officers into the area, and you increase unnecessary contacts, and there's going to be an increase in the use of force within that portion of the community. So leadership does play a big role on the use of force in several ways. One, accountability. Two, making sure that our operations are conducted in a way that we reduce the likelihood. And number three, the training. And all those three areas there are areas that we're looking to address and that we've developed plans for moving forward.
Thank you, Chief. And it looks like we have another one for you. What types of education are being reviewed for use for those arrested to teach them what caused their interaction with police and how to prevent it in the future? It seems that to have just one side educated to accomplish a complete strategy.
You know, when I saw that question, I was excited, and I want to thank you for that question, because this is why community dialogue is so important. I had never thought about how do we put an education campaign to reduce force. And I will tell you, that is something that we're going to be looking forward at and seeing how we develop this type of community education to educate the community, because it will help us in a variety of different levels. Number one, it sets expectations to individuals with their interactions with law enforcement. Number two, it clearly defines and helps us explain situations when they're reviewed by the public at a later time. And number three, it kind of puts an accountability portion on the individuals also who are engaged in activity that result in the use of force. So I really liked that concept, and I think it's a great idea, and I think we're going to really research and see how we can move some type of media campaign forward. So I thank you for that. And like I said at the very beginning of this question, this is exactly why we need engagement from the community, and we need to be able to talk to the community.
Thank you, Chief. We have time for one more question on this one, and this is going to be more for data analyst Kate Jacobs. As you have numbers of use of force, is there qualitative data about what leads to a use of force?
Okay, I think Commander Lowe might be a little frozen.
Calls result in use of force. Kate?
Okay, so yes, we do look at specifically what types of calls are associated with uses and shows of force. And what's really interesting is if you speak to police officers just anecdotally, they could probably tell you, but we did look at that with the data. And so it's things like domestic violence, aggravated assault and battery, and that is in the annual. So if you find that report online, we do talk about that at length. Some of the other more qualitative things we're doing, we're looking at some trends and sharing that quarterly with our academy. So I think that is a good question. It's important to balance the quantitative and the qualitative data. The annual use of force tends to be focused on the quantitative data, the hard measurements, but we do have those qualitative data points as well. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Kate. We were going to go on to our next presentation and answer some questions. If we have some time at the end, we'll either answer in person or we'll be able to follow up via email, just so everyone knows that each question will be answered. So going on to the next presentation is for Sean Gassner. He is taking place of Kara Garcia for a few. She is out sick. Sean has been working under the Compliance and Oversight Division for some years now, really part of the auditing team. And Sean, if you're ready, we can go and get started.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sean.
Okay, like Commander said, my name is Sean Gassner. I work for the Performance Metrics Unit. I've been with the department since 2015, primarily doing compliance-based data work. So the performance metrics unit, the scope of work includes inspecting sworn officers for court-approved settlement agreement compliance. So that's the CASA that we're looking at. We do have mostly monthly audits that we do, but we, depending on what the CASA asks for, we will do those inspections on a quarterly or annual basis as well. We report the results to the executive command staff, also to the sergeants themselves. We use the scorecard that highlights compliance scores in each area. And I will be showing an example of those on one of the next slides here. We also conduct the evidence-related inventory inspections for seized narcotics and weapons prior to destruction. So that's just an audit to make sure that everything that's meant to be destroyed is still there when the evidence unit goes to destroy it. This is the breakdown of who we are currently inspecting. So this has expanded a lot from when we started doing the inspections. We started out with just doing 3 of the area commands. And as you can see, we are now doing all 6 area commands along with a variety of the specialized units. So we just added the DWI units, the motors units, the impact units. And we're basically continually expanding the number of teams and the number of officers that we include in the metrics that we record. And these are the inspections that we do. So this is the list that we have of the types of inspections and audits that our team would be responsible for. They are all going to be specific measurable requirements in the CASA, and each metric references the corresponding paragraph in the CASA. So things like access to complaint forms, we will actually go and physically inspect all of the places where the complaint forms and postings are supposed to be. For the on-body recording devices, we will go through a sample of officers every single month, ensure that they're uploading their recordings in a timely manner. And we'll also take a sample from the CADs of required recording incidents or mandatory recording incidents, and we'll ensure that the officer who was on that call has a recording of the mandatory recording incident. For supervision, there are a few things that we'll actually look for. Primarily, from month to month, they are required to do the line inspections, which can include everything from the functioning of their on-body camera to the taser weapon that they carry, to having department-approved weapons and ammunition, and we do conduct that inspection every month. Electronic control weapons is one that does have a quarterly component. We check that the officers follow the CASA requirement to upload all of their TASER data on at least a quarterly basis. And then the investigative timeliness, that is the only aspect of use of force that we're currently involved with. And the only aspect of that that we're looking at right now is on the timeliness of the investigation. So they have the CASA lays out a 72-hour deadline for the first line use of force investigation. And so we ensure that either that's completed or that a extension request was completed and approved. We also do the firearms check. So every officer is required to have their qualifications for every weapon that they carry. All that data is sent to us, and we do a 100% inspection of the firearms qual scores every time. So in creating these scorecards, we invested in some new technology in the department. This is all in a database now that's accessible by everyone in the department, from commanders all the way down to sergeants, and we'll send it out every month. We did update our TASER weapons, or you'll see them referred to as the electronic control weapons, on a lot of the scorecards. The new version of the TASER now allows us to differentiate between trigger pulls, where the actual probes are deployed from the TASER, and spark testing, where they're just hitting the buttons on the sides of the TASER to check that it's functioning. So we do report all of our findings using this sort of scorecard format. It allows us to break down the compliance ratings on a department-wide level. We can do it by each unit. We can do it by teams within area commands. And each subcategory will have its own compliance score based on what was inspected for that month or quarter or year. These are automated scorecards, so they'll, as soon as we conduct the inspections or the audits every single month, that data will be compiled into the scorecard, and the percentage will be calculated. The scorecards provide a user-friendly format to help management quickly distinguish areas needing improvement. So this is the color code that we use. If they're above 95% compliance for the team or the unit, they'll get the green score. If they're between 85% and 94%, then they'll go to yellow. Anything below 85% is going to get colored red on these scorecards. So the next slide is going to be a comparison of the compliance scores, what we had calculated in June of 2019, compared to the current compliance scores from this year in July of 2020. So these are the percentages, and you can see this in June. This was before we had started auditing the Southwest and Southeast area commands. But as you can see, and as Chief had pointed out previously, there were a lot of red and yellow entries all across the department when we first started doing these. In July 2020, and I can say this is pretty typical for the area commands now. You can see it was almost all at 100% compliance, with just a couple of spots of non-compliance here and there. And so this is actually pretty typical of what we see even when we add specialized units. The specialized unit, as they get used to what we're looking at and what we're looking for, and the inspections that we do, they may get a couple of scorecards that don't look good, but very quickly, once they kind of understand what we're requiring them to do, those numbers will typically improve pretty quickly. So I think that when we look at these scorecards and the progress that we're making, it does show a desire to work towards compliance in the field, all the way down to kind of the sergeant and officer level. And it does show culture change. This is the leadership pyramid. So the scorecards will go to basically every level of management at APD, all the way down to the sergeants. We'll send it to the commanders and lieutenants, and then shortly after that, we'll send this out to the sergeants. The scorecards are used by the executive command to evaluate the compliance efforts within the department. And then the sergeants can use it to evaluate their own individual team, or even go down to individual members of the team and evaluate trends or potential issues. So these are kind of the goals that we have for the process that we're using. We want to use the data that we generate to bridge the communication gap with the community. We want to build a database of objective data to build trust internally and with the community. We're trying to tell the story of what's happening within the department, and the operations inside of the teams and the organization as a whole. And we believe that reliable data is a powerful management tool that will help drive accountability in the department. So that is everything I have. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Let me turn off the screen share. Oh, you got it.
Thank you, Sean. There was one question about slide 7, and I know that you probably just took it down, but it's just the difference between the scorecards from 2019 to 2020, and it was talking about the different categories. If you could just talk a little bit about how we've expanded and really pulled out different categories specific to the CASA and the requirements that we have to abide by.
Right. So when we first started, I think we started with mostly line inspection data, and we did actually initially start doing the complaint form postings right away. We've expanded that to utilize a lot of the data that's now in evidence.com. So that's anything that's associated with the taser weapons or the body cameras get stored online with the taser company, and we've implemented a lot of that. And we do have, as I said, we do have additional data now for the taser weapons, which allows us to actually differentiate between the firing the taser, the spark testing of the tasers, and there's a lot of data available on that platform.
Thank you, Sean. I don't see any other questions about scorecards specific, but I do have a few more for Chief. Chief, our next one is, how is APD moving forward on overtime policy following the public review process as part of accountability?
You know, I think this goes hand in hand with how we have to develop systems within the Albuquerque Police Department to monitor ourselves. I've been in this department 26 years, and I can't tell you how many times the overtime issue has come. This also ties into the leadership question that was asked earlier and how leadership impacts a police department. Shortly after I became interim chief, the overtime issue reared its head again. And within weeks, we had a special order out that is now going through our review process to develop a stronger policy. It's not going to stop at that. And we can never just let things and have an idea that we do a correction and it's fixed forever. So in order to accomplish this overtime problem of getting fixed forever, or always monitoring it, so we make the fixes as we need to more timely. Right now in March, we'll be conducting our first audit of overtime with recommendations that will come to the chief. This is another way for us to self-audit ourselves. Those recommendations will come to the chief's office. We'll look at the recommendations and we'll make changes as needed. And our goal is to do this every quarter so that we're identifying trends more rapidly. And it even also helps us distribute our officers. For example, if homicide has a ton of overtime related to case preparation, well, it's going to tell us maybe we need to give more resources to homicide. If we're getting a lot of overtime in other specialized units, it's going to tell us maybe we need to grow those units. So that's how we intend to continue to correct the overtime problem. And the most important thing to remember is it's not just developing a one-time policy. We need to stay fluid and always be making changes as new circumstances arise.
Thank you, Chief. This next one is a little lengthy, but it's an important one because it talks about internal affairs, the quarterly report, as it pertains to policy violations and discipline. So internal affairs report from the third quarter 2020 shows many instances of officers violating rules, mandatory body camera reporting and use, misconduct, and several other incidents where officers only received a verbal/written reprimand. What will be done about these situations in regards to consequences for these violations so that the community will be more willing to trust the officers charged with serving the community?
You know, and that's an important question, and that ties right back into leadership and accountability. I think that is a theme that needs to occur. A lot of those cases end at the commander level, and that is why we're setting up a system and a scorecard to understand that commanders are imposing discipline and what level of discipline they're imposing. And if they are imposing discipline that's not in line with what our chart of sanctions, our process shows exactly where discipline should fall. And upon that, individuals can review that case, and they could add mitigating factors if something to help lower the discipline, but there has to be specific factors met, or aggravating why it should be raised. And as a department, when those mitigating or aggravating circumstances are added, or somebody goes outside of that chart of sanctions, we have to have a way to flag it. So we're looking at this system, and we're also looking to have one reviewer over most of the IA cases and force cases, so there's a consistency. If you put 14 individuals in a room, it's very hard to get them all to see something the same way. We know that, it's human nature. But we're kind of doing the same thing by giving 14 different commanders the ability to review cases and come up with a consistent message or a consistent discipline. So in order to take the 14 different opinions out, that's why we're looking to hire one commander who will review all those cases. And in the past, it used to go up the person's chain of command. And now what we're going to be looking is sending it to a different chain of command so that they could view it. So I think there's a lot of changes that we're making to ensure that there's accountability and that those that are holding people accountable are doing it properly and within the guidelines of our charter sanctions.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to go through a couple more here to see if we have, oh, nope, we got it, thank you. You know, culture change is always a big one for us, Chief. I know that you covered quite a bit, especially with discipline and the leadership changes. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else on culture change right now.
You know, the one thing I'd want to say about culture change is not something that we snap our fingers and people are changed or the department's changed. I think it's important that as a leader of a police department or any organization, big companies, the most important thing is to manage change so that your company is successful through this change that is occurring within the department. And that's where it's so important that our executive staff of the police department manage this change and ensure the change happens, number one, but number two, ensures that it doesn't impact services. My number one priority is make the city of Albuquerque safe. That's my number one goal, and make sure that it's done constitutionally with the individuals that we have interactions with. And we have to be able to ensure that we keep working and our officers are out there every day being proactive, and we develop that culture from the beginning at the academy on what our expectations are. We have a lot of individuals in the system that slowly learn these new ideas, and we're teaching them new ways of doing things. And that's what's going to lead to culture change and exposing them to new situations. One of the examples I'll use on this, and I'll finish with this, is last year I had every commander in this department go out and help feed the homeless at the West Side shelter. And most of the commanders, you know, were resistant to it at first and asked, Chief, why are you making us go out here to do this? But every single one afterwards came back with a new level of empathy for the individuals. And I heard the stories of the individual who worked at Taco Bell that lived there because he just didn't make enough money to rent an apartment and buy a car. And they viewed everybody out there a little bit differently. And that's how culture change occurs, is slowly exposing individuals to other situations and other means and having them view things a little bit differently. This is what the goal of our ambassador program is bringing in the views of different parts of the community and the different cultures within the community, and ensuring that we pass those views and that we gain an understanding of those views as a police department. So culture change is not something that's accomplished overnight. It's not accomplished through mass levels of terminations or people leaving the department. It's accomplished through slowly every day applying consistent pressure and exposing our employees to different situations and educating them on the importance of their role within our community.
Thank you, Chief. I think there was one other question. I think I can pretty much answer this one, is will the data itself be available to the public barring the PII redaction? Yes, it will. You know, we're very proud of our scorecards. We're very proud of the work that's been done to get us where we are now. It's been a complete transition when it comes to those specifics on the scorecards, and we will be making them available on the city website. And we're really working with our communication experts to get them out on social media. So we're trying to capture several different platforms for this information. We do not have any other questions, but I did want to thank, during the chat, we've been receiving a lot of volunteers for helping us with education. We will say that we cannot do this alone. We've been working really well with the community members, and we appreciate every feedback that, any feedback that we get, and we do take it into consideration, and any help that we can get, we're going to accept it. And we appreciate everyone's time and effort to be at this meeting. I know that Kate Jacobs and Sean Gassner have put a lot of effort into the work that they do, and they take a lot of pride, and we're excited to have that transparency and start getting it out to the public. So if there's not any questions, I do not see any in the chat. Oops, I do. I'm sorry, I see one more. One more question. I'd like to see how APD in the future will respond to protesters for Black Lives. I have seen in the streets marching and healing the community and have seen the difference in response to us versus protesters against mask mandates and lockdowns. How will these differences change in the future, or do you see a difference?
You know, there is a huge difference in how we've learned to interact and how we continually modify our response to these demonstrations. The first week that I actually took over the department, one of the things that occurred is we had an individual drive through a bunch of protesters and almost strike them. That next morning, I reached out to one of the protest organizers and we started a good dialogue. And we've been working on developing a relationship with the Black New Mexico movement. I've met with them several times and we've come to an understanding and they've educated me. For example, every law enforcement agency always thought it was best, hey, block off both sides of the street so nobody gets run over. During this simple conversation over the phone, I learned, hey, leave one lane of traffic open. They want to demonstrate and they want people to see what they're trying to demonstrate. So we've learned a lot from this relationship. Following this, we met with Deputy Chief Smathers, met with every group that we've known to organize these types of demonstrations. And we have to be willing to have an ear, lend an ear to those individuals who want to be heard and work in cooperation with them and understand that they're out there because of a level of frustration to the injustices that we're seeing across the nation. We opened today with talking about the national dialogue on law enforcement and the use of force. These individuals are part of that dialogue, and we just have to get better as a department to continue to listen and communicate with those in the community and ensure that we're coming up with responses and we understand everybody's point of view and what they're trying to accomplish. And this all ties right back into why it's so important that we have an ambassador program that works with all the different groups within the community, or as many as we can, so we have an understanding beforehand and we could educate our officers and ourselves beforehand. These situations happen than at the heat of the moment when they're occurring.
Thank you, Chief. Again, we'd like to thank everyone that has joined us today, and we appreciate it very much. Sorry we got such a late start. We think we worked out the kinks for the next time. So thank you again, and have a great holiday and a great weekend. Bye.